Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in. Again, I am Kaylee Bateman, the Managing Director, Community and Partnerships at SheCanCode, and today we're discussing how AI can help women in tech. I've got the incredible Ruth Bucknell, VP Experience Design at Merkle with me today to dive into the ways that tech products and AI systems are often shaped by male defaults, reinforcing biasness through skewed data sets, and why correcting this matters for everyone, amongst a few other things that we're going to touch upon today. So welcome, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have the conversation.
Yeah, it's such a topical one as well. So we're so pleased to have you on here to chat about it. Can we get started with a bit of background about you to set the scene for our listeners, please?
Yes, absolutely. So I actually started my career in the creative space. I trained as a designer, but it was quite broad, and I actually spent a lot of my time focusing on kind of tech-enabled design. So how can we use technology to bring the creative space to life? When I finished studying, it was actually the credit crunch and jobs were very, very sparse. So worked freelance for free within a number of different agencies, kind of racking up some experience, and soon figured out that actually I really enjoyed working with technology and looking at how technology can enable creativity. And when I studied, UX wasn't really a thing. User experience wasn't really a thing. And so spent a lot of time in unpacking how humans operate with machines, whether that's basic level websites or apps or digital products, and how we can make a digital experience much more, consuming and user friendly. And then worked for a number of different agencies with technology and looking at how we could then use tech to enable that, but making sure at every single point that what we're designing is very human centered. And have always operated in the manner of, you need to understand the unmet needs of today, but we have to focus on the unimagined futures of tomorrow. And working in that space is quite exciting. And this is why I actually love what we do, because, who knows what this is all going to look like in 2 years. I mean, 4 years ago, AI wasn't mentioned, and now it's in every single conversation, every single pitch. So yeah, it's transforming quickly.
Yes, I love that. And you can hear it. I can hear it in your voice, but you can hear it in people's voices in tech when they talk about how fast things change and why they enjoy working in this industry. And it's almost a shame. It's like a hidden secret that people don't know until they get into tech, because they have that misconception of working in the tech industry, especially now with things like AI, how exciting that can be to work in. I love the fact as well that you refer to it as creative, because a lot of people they think that tech is going to be quite boring and quite rigid, and you end up in a job where you don't get to be that innovative in your role. Is that something that you have that opinion of the tech industry before? Did you really think, back when you were at school, thinking, oh, if somebody had said I'd be in tech, years later and doing what I do, it just wasn't something that crossed your mind at that point, and that your role would be this creative?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I studied, IT wasn't even, something that you studied at school. We grew up with the stereotypes that dad would fix everything in the house when it came to technology. So I didn't necessarily notice that bias, but I do think that it was definitely in me. And then even when I started out in the industry, even developers were like, oh, those are the ones that stay in dark rooms with, the blinds shut. There was a very, very clear stereotype. But actually, I thrived with working with developers and people who could enable the vision that I had, because I do think if you bring creativity with technology to life, you can create some amazing, amazing things.
Yes, Definitely. And it is like you have that misconception about certain roles, and then you get in and you think, oh, I didn't know actually it was going to be like this. And the more that we share stories like yours and what other people are doing in tech, the more it inspires other people to think, actually, I could do that. Or I have lots of people in our community who have said that they were inspired by somebody else that was doing it. They really didn't realize what it was going to be, and so many of our community are career transitioners. They've been in work 10, 15 years already, and then they realize they have all of these wonderful skills. A lot of them come over as project managers, for instance, and they go, actually, I didn't know I could do that in tech because I already do all of these things anyway. And a lot of their skills just transfer straight into the tech industry. And then you find yourself in an industry, like you said, that is just really fast paced and moving forward, and you land in the right company, then that's it.
Exactly. And, I always talk about the type of people that we hire, and I want curious individuals,
Mm.
people who are always asking questions, trying to unpick the next challenge or come up with a solution. And one of the things that we're really seeing with AI is it's bringing closer the design skill set and the technology skill set, especially from a front end development perspective, because now the designer has all of the tools within their kind of suite of tools to be able to actually bring their ideas to life super quickly. It's so easy to vibe code something, whereas in the past you would have a static design that might have been done back in the day in Photoshop or InDesign, and now everybody's using Figma, and now with the click of a button, even in Figma, you can develop a prototype, but now I can even go and vibe code something super quickly, get all of the code, and then give that to the back end developer to stitch in with some of the APIs. So it's really starting to see us embracing a slight role shift and bringing the two capabilities massively together.
Yes, I love that. And I wanted to ask you, because obviously you've built your career in a male-dominated industry, which would have come with lots of unique challenges. Going into tech has its own challenges anyway. But can you share some of the challenges that you faced along the way, and what intentional inclusion has looked like for you in practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's funny looking back because at the time, I don't think I really realized it. I just thought it was the status quo. It was the norm that I was, faced myself in meetings where I was maybe the only female. And actually, at the time, I was less conscious about my gender and more conscious about my age, which is interesting. That I thought, oh, maybe, these guys have been around for years. They've got a wealth of experience. They're not going to be interested in little old me. So it's funny that actually gender at the time never really crossed my mind. I was much more conscious about the wealth of experience that I maybe had, rather than these days. I really encourage younger generations to challenge our thinking, because there's much more interesting ways of delivering things that maybe we wouldn't consider. So I say that that's a huge shift. But yeah, I noticed that as I started to progress, that I was, when as an industry we started to become aware that actually we needed to promote more female advocacy within the tech space. I remember suddenly being included very last minute in many pitches. I was like, okay, it's clearly just a load of men sitting around a table. We need some female blood in here to kind of show that we are a diverse group of individuals. And I remember thinking at the time, I want to be included for my visionary thinking, my thought process, the diversity of thinking that I bring, rather than being brought in right at the last minute because I fit the gender requirement that we have. And I remember actually speaking up at the time, and declining to be part of a couple of pitches last minute, because I said, I love growth and pitching and coming up with ideas, but I want to be involved throughout. I don't want to just be involved at the last moment. And that's where I don't know, something switched in me that I suddenly became very aware of why I was being included, but actually that gave me a voice. And that's why one of the reasons actually why we wanted, and I started the Women in Tech Network, is to try and stop some of those challenges that many faced, and quite honestly still do face. But I also had some great sponsors as well, who put me in situations that were slightly outside of my comfort zone, but they believed that I could have a voice. One of those was he's actually now our CMO at Dentsu, a man called Aslan Raj. Now, why he really sticks in my mind is because he wasn't somebody who just said, Ruth, I'll put your name in the hat for that, you can do it. He then really coached me through the opportunity as well, making sure that throughout I was comfortable. I had some pointers, some steering from him, and that's something that's really stuck with me. From a sponsorship perspective, is sponsorship isn't just a label that you can give somebody. It's actually providing them the opportunity, but really coaching them through it so that they succeed and that they can go on to the next one.
Yes, definitely. It isn't just a label. I think a lot of people say they are sponsors or mentors or coaches of people, and it's not necessarily that useful or what you're looking for someone.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you mentioned your age and experience over gender. And we have quite a few people approach us when we're at shows, for instance, and we get students or career transitioners, and they say, how do I move forward in an industry without the experience in it? And the experience and showing what you can do when you don't have that yet, for instance, if you're still young, it really does worry people. And I think in tech, that's almost worse because you get into tech and people use a lot of jargon, and you find yourself in a meeting where you're like, I don't understand what's happening. Imposter syndrome kicks in, and you sort of start to have that feeling of, am I meant to be here? And it can be quite intimidating to be in those meetings with people that are very experienced, and that unfortunately does cause a lot of people to think, I don't want to be in this anymore. So I suppose sometimes as well, being in the right company where age doesn't matter and you are still included and encouraged to, you have to find that experience along the way. Some companies are very good at that, as you said, coaching people along the way instead of just saying that we're helping and not actually helping those people that might be sitting there having those worries like, what's everyone talking about? I don't have this experience.
Absolutely. And it's super interesting, right? Because AI has suddenly made information accessible to all.
Yeah.
So, experience used to be about the number of years that you had as a developer. Whereas now, with access to AI tools, that anybody in an entry position can code super quickly and easily because it's so readily available. And even people without a tech background can also start to play and interface with technology solutions because it's very easy. The interface now to code is very human centered. And so AI, in a way, is really starting to shift how younger audiences can enter and challenge the status quo. Now, you do need experience, life experience, more than anything, of how to handle client conversations or challenging projects, and that does come with experience, and that's not something that AI can replace. But I read a study recently where the leader of a team gave a challenge of, I need you to design a new digital product, and you've got 2 weeks to design it. And he gave the task to 3 individuals: somebody who had 20 years experience, somebody who had like 8 to 10 years experience, and somebody who was like two years experience. And 2 weeks later, the person who had 20 years experience had come back with 20 screens that they'd designed. the person with 8 to 10 had come up with a prototype that they'd made, and then the person with 2 years experience had vibe coded a whole interface and had done it in half of the time.
Oh, wow.
And so if you take it on face value that actually all of the concepts were the same level of quality, it just shows you that actually there are new tools that younger generations are now experimenting with that are really showcasing like fantastic talent and thought process, that if we take that, you know, experience and pair it with the enthusiasm of some of these tools, and actually we're, you know, it's going to be quite powerful. But that's for me a great example of how, you know, the younger generation can shift things up.
Yeah, well, that's such an interesting test, because you would think, yeah, as you said, with the quality, yes, somebody with all those years' experience might be better in terms of quality, but they're also always going to have that thought of, but this is how I've always done it. I've always started this way, or I've always been through this process. And then people with less experience just cut to the chase, and because they don't have that process in their mind yet either. They just thought, what's the easiest way I can do this? And again, that comes down to diverse teams, you know, not just with gender, but different experience levels and different people dipping in. And if you've got all of those people and you think, we've got such an experienced team, everybody's got 20 years of experience, and you're all doing the same thing and not necessarily moving as fast as some other younger, fresh minds might bring to the table. I love that. I haven't heard that experiment before. That's a brilliant example. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the Women in Tech Network that you launched. What inspired you to found the Women in Tech Network, and what impact have you seen it has created for women in the industry so far?
Yeah. So initially, it was really noticing the kind of lack of representation and role models. To be honest, I had no one to look up to from a female perspective in the tech landscape, especially in kind of more of the leadership and engineering roles. And I also, as I mentioned, noticed that there were few women in the rooms where technology decisions were being made. And also another trigger for me was having a daughter. And I suddenly started to think about all of my experiences growing up. Like I mentioned, you know, my father being the only one who could fix, you know, the TV when it wasn't working. And I thought that actually the exposure that we give to our children when we're young is the most important, to show that, you know, girls can do anything, and it doesn't just have to be, you know, a stereotypical like male job. So that was a big trigger, and I founded it with my partner in crime, a woman called Sarah Painter at the time, and the objective was really to create a community of visibility and that support network where men and not women and men. I think I want to make that point that I've been part of so many female in leadership programs, and they are never successful unless you include men as part of the process, because if not, it's a complete echo chamber of women speaking about the same challenges to women, whereas actually to get that sponsor or to get that seat at the table, you need men and those who have access to realize the seat of power that they're in to invite you in. So that was something that was hugely important to me. And then the other trigger was I've worked with many global teams or teams around the world. So, you know, we've had teams in Jordan or India, and, you know, we've got a fantastic team in Bulgaria. And I started to notice that actually in some of those other areas in the world that we were working with, they had a much higher female intake. And then I started to do some digging to be like, why are some countries thriving and then others, quite honestly, in the Western world, we're falling behind? And like Bulgaria has the best male female ratio in ICT sector within Europe. Jordan, they have like 45% of women study computer science, which then showcases like an incredible pipeline of future talent. And even in India, 34%, so it's not a huge percentage of the IT workforce are women, and most of that actually sits under 30. So again, you start to see a bit of an age challenge as people progress maybe into the years that are considered like the motherhood years, which is another challenge. So it was a mixture of underrepresentation and lack of leadership that I was witnessing, but also inspiration of different cultures that were facing different challenges, but actually female representation seemed to be much higher. So the goal really for us, like I mentioned, was to create a safe and supportive space for women to connect, share, and have that exposure of actually, other cultures that were outperforming us, and what could we take to learn and embed within, the power that we have within Merkle to start to challenge that.
I love that, especially the different cultures. We're very lucky on Spilling the Tea. We get to talk to lots of different people around the world. And when you ask them about like what they wanted to do when they were young and what they studied, and you'll get certain people from certain countries who will always say, oh, I always wanted to do STEM subjects. Of course, I wanted to do computer science, and loads of people in my family were doing it, and that was a great inspiration. And then, like you said, you get other people, mostly in the West, who will be like, I didn't really have any role models. I fell into tech, and I was in work 15 years already, and luckily fell into it. But it's so interesting to hear where people get that inspiration from, because if there's no one at school encouraging you, or if there's nobody in your family that's doing it, then how do you find your way in? I've had lots of community members tell me that their husbands inspired them, and a lot of that happened in lockdown, because they were working at the kitchen table and noticed their husband was a scrum master or a developer, and they was like, oh, I could do that. And a lot of our community members said that they actually retrained and came into tech as a result. And sometimes it's just seeing someone in action, somebody to inspire you, because like you said, there is a lack of role models, unfortunately, especially at leadership roles. And suddenly you'll see someone doing that and you think, I could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so the thought process behind the Women in Tech Network was that we had like three pillars that we wanted to really focus on. One was really inspiring the next generation. That's key. It's not the people that we necessarily work with, but it's offering that inspiration to women. So we worked and partnered with people like Girls Who Code, where we then had an intake of young females from schools, and then we also did a program with universities to show them how you could enter the tech space, which was not only inspiring for them but really inspiring for the community within Merkle. The other pillar is improving representation by focusing on more recruitment and retention. So from a younger generation perspective, we're actually seeing this split between male and female improving. We start to see some challenges as women enter kind of the years that are considered often like the motherhood years, where then suddenly there is a bit of a gap still in the leadership positions, which is something that we're still trying to tackle. But really importantly, as I mentioned earlier, it's about empowerment and allyship. So upskilling not only women, but fostering like male allyship and really sponsorship to reach gender parity is key.
Yes, and how to let men know as well that how they can get involved. We have a lot of men who ask, they want to come into our community and show their support, and they're wondering how. So we always say, we have a mentoring program, come in and be part of that. We have lots of male allies in the directory in there, but men don't always realize, allyship is a bit more than saying, yes, I'm in support of women in tech. It's like, where can I get involved and how can I show my support here? Because they might have seen good things happening in their own companies and can see the benefit of leaning into that a bit more. I wanted to ask you, pick your brains a little bit about AI and the fact that a lot of AI systems are built on data sets that reflect male defaults. Can you give us some real world examples of how that bias shows up in tech products and why it's important to address?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a bit of digging around this to make sure that I can bring some facts and figures to you. But even I notice it in voice assistants that we speak to. Early versions of like Siri or Alexa, they've always defaulted to female voices and respond quite submissively to questions that have been asked. So I think even subconsciously, that role of providing information is taken on by the female voice. Now, if you then start to do a bit more digging and start to think about the models where facial recognition have been built, and what we've seen is that systems are showing a much higher error rate for women and people of colour, sometimes even completely misidentifying them entirely, because it shows that the data that they're looking at is not as maybe inclusive as needed. So, for example, there's a couple of studies that have been done in the US that show like the error rate of light-skinned men was about less than 0.8%, but the error rates for dark-skinned women were as high as 35%. And
Gosh.
in some areas for like the darkest skinned women, error rates reach nearly 50%. And that root issue is really in the training and the evaluation of data sets, which are heavily skewed towards lighter skinned male faces. So that gives us, something to consider, that AI is not it's reliant on the quality of data that it is ingesting. So I think that we all have real responsibility about making sure that the data is inclusive and representative of the real world. And that, it has huge impact because, if you can misclassify people based on like intersectionality and their traits like gender and race, we then start to see default errors, and that has huge real world consequences. So, for example, like surveillance and misidentification and exclusion. So that's, I find something incredibly interesting. And then I don't know if you remember, there was Amazon used an AI tool for all of its recruiting. It's around 2018, and they disclosed that as they used this internal recruiting algorithm that helped personalize resumes and then exclude certain resumes, and it had excluded many words that and that were linked to female traits, so even things like women. So they would exclude CVs if it included something like women's chess club or something like that, because historically male applicants had always applied, and again the data was based on all of those CVs or resumes that they had consumed previously, that then showed a huge bias towards potential new applicants that could then showcase that diversity. And even, so I suppose the takeaway is, it's not, yes, it's looking at AI, and I'll just come on to that in a second, as in the kind of the tools themselves. But firstly, we need to make sure that the data is right, because if not, there's no hope. And then the other challenge we have is that actually, because we have such a male dominated industry in the development of tech and AI, that all of these tools are being built by predominantly men, and therefore there is this natural bias. So it's our responsibility to ensure again that we have women entering this space that can also show that diversity of thought and perspective in developing these tools, to make sure that we don't have that bias that's the kind of inherent in the product itself. So yeah, it's super interesting, and I think it's something that we're becoming more aware of. But it's definitely, 2018 with the Amazon AI fiasco isn't that long ago.
No, actually, it's not. And you think interview processes, a lot of companies have been working on them, and how to make sure that you get a more diverse talent pool, for instance, coming through. And then if AI comes in, and it almost just completely forgets as well everything that companies have been doing. I remember being told about an orchestra who always had lots of male musicians, and the way that they got around it was they started blind auditioning everybody, and there was still too many men getting through, and they was like, but is this something that we're doing? So they made everybody take their shoes off when they were doing it, so as you walked across the stage you couldn't quite hear whether it was a male or a female. And as soon as they done that, more females were picked to be part of the orchestra. And it's like certain places know that that is inherent, and they're taking steps to make sure that they can improve that. If then AI comes along and then starts to erase some of the things that have been happening, and those sorts of mistakes happen, like with Amazon, it's not useful, because the pipeline just gets smaller. Those people just don't make it through to even a first interview. If that data isn't correct, as you said.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting when we talk about bias because there's also this other recent study that was done auditing LLMs. So specifically ChatGPT, I think it was like 3.5 and 4. And they were measuring the self-preference bias between AI systems. And what they were seeing is that there was a tendency for AI systems to favor CVs generated by themselves rather than human written ones.
Ah,
Which is so now not only do we have the bias between gender and maybe age, but we're developing these tools that are starting to understand the way in which they, represent themselves and are now favoring AI generated solutions rather than the human ones. So we're now entering a huge space that we just don't even know quite how to manage.
yeah. That is so interesting. We were actually talking about that with somebody who helps us with content recently. And he was saying there are obviously lots of AI generated articles, but the human ones are still performing much better traffic wise. But that's interesting, because if people start putting out AI generated content everywhere, will eventually Google start, changing its algorithm and thinking, actually, I prefer those over the human ones, and the tide could turn. It's so interesting how fast things are moving.
And like we're seeing it massively with pitching as well. So many procurement teams are now using AI tools to go through pitch responses to give that kind of first review of have these agencies answered these questions in the right way. And so again, if there is a preference for AI tools to kind of favor themselves, it's start you one have to be very careful about using AI in your answers, but also if you then start to see this bias appear, it's like you know, do you have to play the game
Mm, yes.
slightly?
Definitely. And so Dove's ethical AI and zero party data strategy, that's a refreshing example of how companies can push back against bias. What aspects of that initiative do you think are most groundbreaking for women in tech and beyond?
I mean, Dove have such a powerful brand that they can make such a great statement for women. And for those of you listening that haven't heard about the campaign, Dove noticed that there are many AI tools that favor or have a view of what beauty looks like because it has been programmed predominantly by men. But actually, that isn't a reflection of what real beauty looks like. So they partnered with Pinterest to create a really inclusive quiz, which was retraining the AI algorithm behind Pinterest of what beauty looks like. And I just think that's hugely powerful. So as a person, you could go through and select, out of two images, what was more beauty, somebody who had no freckles or somebody who had loads of freckles, lots of different considerations, especially around skin color, body shape and size, height, everything. It was really thought about every aspects of beauty, and one, I think it was a powerful statement to make, but also it was a great way from a business perspective to then really start to collect first party data to then be able to kind of target and go back out to women. So for me, it was a super powerful way in which brands can start to pivot and consider different ways in which they can use the tool to their advantage and take a stand. But I do think there are some counter examples out there that we also have to be aware of. And actually, going back to your comment around content, is something it's very much on my mind. And I don't know if you remember, during Wimbledon, there was an influencer that was created, Mia Zulu, and no, she was all over the press, but she was an AI generated influencer,
Oh, yeah.
and she was, you know, I mean, she was beautiful, but beautiful to a point of like, could any person ever achieve that level of beauty? And many of the photos massively duped people, but it wasn't real, yet many people believed it was. And then this synthetic persona sparked huge debate around authenticity, manipulation, and trust in digital environments. So, this also raises loads of red flags where we need to consider synthetic personas that are presenting this ambiguity and risk really blurring the lines between the power that influencers have with their real voice and their real opinions and making sure it's authentic versus the manufactured ones. And I don't have an answer about how we police that, but again, it's something that we really need to address, especially in younger audiences, because social media, as we know, has causes huge issues in, I mean, even probably our generation, but in much younger audiences. So we do need to consider the ethical impact that we are having.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of for me about like the transparency and disclosure around it.
Yeah, and always remembering as well to point out that that's not the norm. Like you said, that was just those levels of beauty, or they, I mean, they might exist, but they're incredibly rare because normally you look at Instagram and you're like, everybody else is, successful and beautiful. And how do people look like this? How are people doing this? And we're very, it's the same with, the stories that we like to share in our community. We always encourage people to share, warts and all, how you failed, how especially if you launched a business, like what happened with all of the things that went wrong as well, because they're the things that people want to hear. If you're always presented with this perfect person and perfect life and on Instagram, and then when people actually try to do that, whether they do want to launch a business or do want to look a certain way, it's just unattainable. And like you said, there are so many failures around social media anyway, and how we digest all of that content. But it has become a lot worse with AI and what is being generated, that we're having to see every day and then think, yeah, my life is nothing like that.
Absolutely. And that's why for me Dove's campaign was so powerful, because it looked at not only how shaping how AI is used, but also making sure that it's not passively being shaped and it's being used for something for the greater good, which obviously
Yes.
aligns with their brand values. But I think hearing the real voice and the real human, and seeing that is much more powerful. And again, it's something as women we want to see, because we want, we don't want to compare ourselves to something that's just unattainable.
Exactly. So looking ahead, what excites you about AI's potential to create more inclusive workplaces and technologies for women, and what still worries you?
Oh gosh, what a question to finish on.
It's
Um,
not a loaded question for you.
yeah. So I think AI can really help us remove certain barriers, and it democratizes access to information. So it actually puts people on a level playing field in terms of, information and starting out. So, earlier on we talked about the age challenges, whereas actually now, sometimes if you're younger and are very fluent with this technology, you actually have much more power in your hands. So it's really removing some of those traditional gatekeepers that we had. It's also giving us hugely like inclusive design opportunities to kind of challenge the status quo. So think about, the dove example that we spoke about, but also AI, and definitely as a female, and I look at this in some of the challenges we have with more senior women in leadership, is that as women who have multiple hats that they need to wear, whether they're a parent or a carer, I'm certainly entering in that era into my life where I need flexibility and hybrid working to be able to be successful. And I think AI is allowing us to kind of personalize those experiences as well, and allow us to have more of that work-life balance. So I think that's really helping us strive and even thrive in the workforce. And I think it's an exciting era. Like I said at the beginning, there are so many tools that are now accessible, and the interface is so accessible that actually it's making, anybody can design a website or a digital product or code something because those tools are accessible. So we need to think about how we police and our offer that kind of gatekeeper of authority around how the tools are used. But I think that's in some ways it's becoming so much more accessible, which then starts to just level the playing field. In terms of challenges, gosh, there are so many, because I would say AI, it's popping up in every single conversation, but I think we're pretty nascent still in how it's being used. So I don't think it's the kind of golden, bullet to everything. We've spoken about how there are huge gaps in the data, which is something that we have to address in terms of making sure that actually the results that AI is providing is inclusive and representative of the world in which we live in. And that's making sure that we start to encode or decode some of those biases to make sure that it kind of persists. And I think that a real consideration is around the ethical challenges. So we talked about Mia, the AI influencer, and how do we safeguard around that? How do we actually create a space for real human content and experiences to live, versus taking advantage of some of the AI tools that can help us get there? So I think we're pretty nascent in understanding how we regulate and offer that kind of transparency.
Yes, definitely. And as she says, it because things move so fast. I've spoken to a few companies about AI, and they said with them, it's those guardrails, like you said, it's just making sure that as you move through this journey, that those companies are putting them in place, that they're aware as well of things like the recruitment process, what it's going to do to your recruitment process if you use AI, but don't put any guardrails in place. So, and how you're going to go through this phase where you're actually probably going to go backwards on what you were trying to achieve if you don't
Yeah.
try and get ahead of uh, how AI is, for instance, selecting different candidates for you, or always ensuring that. And I've heard this from a few people. AI is really speeding things up and it is helping people, but you always still need that human influence to ensure that somebody is dipping in and checking on things, and just to ensure that you're still moving forward. So it's a good mix of both at the moment, and not kind of heavily relying on AI, because as you said, we're not quite there yet in those. challenges are going to be with us for some time. But we are already out of time. I could keep talking to you about this topic for ages. It is so topical and it is so interesting because there's so much to unpack just in this small area of the tech industry as well and what companies are doing. So thank you so much for taking time out, Ruth. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on here to share your thoughts.
Amazing. Thank you so much again. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, as always, thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you again next time.